Hi, this time I'm going to talk about Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard is one of my favorite authors. I consider him a source of wisdom, both in his positive and negative sides, because, through his characters, he teaches you a lot about freedom, about individuality, about strength, even about being a man. But on the other side of things, Robert E. Howard led a pretty tragic existence. He had some very cool things as well, but he had a tragic end. So it's important to always remember the positive and negative sides to everything so that we can learn from that. To talk about Robert E. Howard, I'm going to support myself on two of his most famous characters, which is Solomon Kane and, of course, Conan the Barbarian. Those two characters give you a lot of information of Robert's struggles and ideals and thoughts. You could also talk about other characters such as Bran McMorn or Steve Costigan, the boxer. But these two are my favorite characters of his, not only because I kind of like grew up with them, but because I think that they offer a lot of glimpses to what Robert E. Howard was going through. I actually didn't understand much about Robert E. Howard when I was a kid. I had to my vision of him matured as I grew up, as I developed into a man. But and that's I think that it's a bit difficult for some people to understand about Robert E. Howard is that they only take a look at Conan as presented in movies, in comic books, in Saturday morning cartoons, but they don't really read the stories, and the source of the fiction. And I actually seen a lot of people talking as if they knew about Conan, but they did not. I actually heard about people that they were just completely off in terms of what Conan is. In case you are not familiar with Conan the Barbarian, I'll try to give you a good overview of what he is as presented in the original stories of Robert E. Howard. Even though for example, in the comic books, I think they do a pretty good job of representing Conan. In fact, some comic books actually take dialogues straight from the original stories. But still, if you want to know about Conan, you really need to read the original stories. Well, let's start by talking about Solomon Kane, because Solomon Kane, it really gives you a good perspective of how Robert E. Howard started to mature as a person, because he actually wrote some of the stories of Solomon Kane before Conan. So you're kind of getting an idea of how young Robert E. Howard was, and how those different thoughts and ideas matured. So let's talk about Solomon Kane. Who is Solomon Kane? You have a really cool picture of him here, illustration. Let me see if I can get that into focus. And you also have an image here of like a representation of all the things that he's going to face or fight against. Solomon Kane, his past is a mystery. You only have a few clues as to what he was before becoming Solomon Kane. He was probably a somewhat successful pirate captain, quite ruthless. And there was a point in his life when he actually came into realization that he was just living a terrible life. He was living as a scoundrel when he was actually at heart a sort of like a champion of good and true justice. So he abandons his scoundrel way of life and becomes a Puritan. And he basically dedicates himself to the destruction of all things evil, to the point that it's an obsession. If Solomon Kane considers something or someone to be evil, he is going to chase down that thing or person until until the very end of the world. He's going to be traveling across countries and continents because he has that obsession of eliminating evil. So in a way, he looks quite obsessive to the point of being almost like a psychopath. And that's some of the coolest aspects of him is how ruthless and cunning he is chasing down his foes. He does have some immature qualities to him, and I will talk about that in a bit. But for the most part, it's quite amazing how he chases down villains. They are also quite surprised. So, for example, there is one part. Let me see if I can see the illustration here. There is one part where a villain is kind of telling him, why are you chasing me? I have no quarrel with you. Why do you care what I did to that broad? Or if I killed those villagers, well, they had it coming. They were weak. Somebody else was going to kill them, and he's kind of like really surprised as to why Solomon Kane is chasing him. Many of the villains that Solomon Kane chases, they give you a quite of a realistic view to things because many bad people in the world, they actually think that they are good guys. So it's perfectly natural for them to kill others and rape and all that to benefit themselves. They're kind of like looking out for number one, but they are villains, they are evil. And Solomon Kane has a very simple answer when one of those villains questions him. You can see right here in this illustration how he's confronting that bad guy over there, and he tells that bad guy, I am chasing you down because you are a rogue whom it is my destiny to kill. That's pretty scary. Imagine if you're a villain and somebody tells you that, you know that there is no way you're going to talk that person out of killing you. Even if you could try bribing him or whatever, no. And so Solomon Kane is a force to be reckoned with, and he chases down bad guys like that. He's also quite of a bit of a gentleman. He's a true knight in shining armor. And these days that concept has been distorted, but Solomon Kane is a protector of women. If he, for example, one time he runs into this very young woman that was raped and eventually died because she suffered a wound, and he becomes obsessed as he's like, where is the bastard that did this? And he's going to chase down that guy. I think it was that guy that I showed you in the picture. So he's always trying to protect good and decent women, but however, make no mistake, if there are evil women, he is going to destroy them, be it an evil sorceress or whatever, going to eliminate them. I think there are a couple of things that show immaturity in Solomon Kane, and I think they also serve as a reflection of some struggles that Robert E. Howard had as he was growing up. The first part is a very childish need to prove his physical strength. Although not as strong as Conan the Barbarian, Solomon Kane is definitely strong. He even kind of like flies into these fits of rage. So his enemies are somewhat and they kind of like sense he has that sort of like a physical pride, and they can actually trick him at times, like provoking him into fighting them. So for example, there is one scene that, let me see if I find the illustration. It's a really cool illustration, really worth it to look at. Here it is. As you can see, he has all of those those are bandits, I think. He's pointing at them with his guns, and they are completely caught off guard. They have no way to respond. They were like eating and counting their money and such, and then suddenly Solomon Kane enters with his guns, and he's like, hold it right there, you know. And but so they're helpless, and Solomon Kane is there to save a couple of people, but the chief, the bandit boss, he tells Solomon Kane, oh, well, Solomon, if it was you against me, one-on-one, without weapons, I was going to kill you, surely. And Solomon Kane was like, come on, let's go. And no, and that really makes me, like, face palm, so to speak, because, first of all, your priority, saving those two people, you shouldn't treat that conflict as a game, because battle is not a game. It's not a sport. It's war. It's the one who wins combat is the one who's smarter, more ruthless. You're not going to give your opponent an advantage. That's really ridiculous. I don't know how many times people, both in fiction and in real life, have been defeated with such trickery, and that just makes them look dumb. So many times Solomon Kane kind of gets tricked into doing that thing. Sometimes, he wins physically, but other times he really messes up things. And so that's one childish thing about him. The other childish thing, like immature thing that I consider of Solomon Kane, is that he kind of like he's not very good at dealing with like treachery or betrayal. It sounds quite harsh, right? You have to be like a heartless person not to be somewhat affected by that. But there is a time when he has like he's not exactly a friend, but more like an acquaintance, and he gets betrayed by that acquaintance, and the other one is like, "Ah, ha, ha, I caught you," and Solomon Kane almost like really hurt in his feelings, kind of like tells him, "I wasn't expecting to be betrayed by someone who I was breaking bread with a few moments ago." So and you will see why I consider that somewhat immature, and how Conan the Barbarian represents like a step up above that when I talk about Conan. But those are some of the things that I think that really catch Solomon Kane off guard, because when he surpasses those things, when he doesn't get himself tricked or carried away by those couple of things, he's really amazing in his fighting and in his reasoning. He's also an excellent sword fighter. He uses the rapier. His main weapons are his guns, his rapier, and something else that is quite magical. And he's never bested one-on-one when he fights with his rapier. He's a superb swordsman. Now let's talk a bit about the world of Solomon Kane. The world of Solomon Kane is like a mirror version of our own. It's supposed to be planet Earth as well, but and it's setting somewhat of a low magic. There is magic. There aren't going to be magically powered ships and floating cities and such, but it's more like magic that suddenly jumps from around the corner and scares you. There are some of his stories that are completely horror stories. One of them that reminds me of the Mexican horror tale of the hairy hand. I'm going to put a link in the description below when I told that story. I think it was used as inspiration from one of the stories in Solomon Kane. There's actually like a hand that walks, and I'm telling you, using its corpsey fingers. I'm telling you this because Robert E. Howard was actually like a fan of many Mexican things. He liked those big sombreros and such. So I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that maybe that was a source of inspiration for the hand story in Solomon Kane. And there are other types of undead creatures. There are some entire tribes that were kind of like vampire zombies. Through some sort of curse or bio process or ritual, they were turned, let me show you an illustration, into some very terrible things. Let me see if I can find it. I'm probably not going to find it, but it's a really good illustration where you can see Solomon Kane. He also uses a musket, and he ran out of bullets, and he's actually using his musket like a club to get rid of those things, and it looks really desperate, really cool. So there is an element of the supernatural, but thankfully Solomon Kane is not without aid. He is a Puritan, so he has a very narrow view of sorcery, and so he considers everything magical bad, kind of like Conan. Everything's bad until he meets Enlonga. And Enlonga is an African witch doctor. Here's the illustration that I was telling you. Just take a look at this. Let me see if I can get that into focus. You see how he's fighting against those vile creatures. And Enlonga is a witch doctor, and Solomon Kane and him, well, they went through a lot of dangerous situations. But in the first time they met, they decide to form a sort of like a pact. They become blood brothers. And Enlonga uses his necromancy to help Solomon Kane in quite a few of the Solomon Kane stories. Enlonga plays a main role in enacting some sort of ritual or ceremony to cast away some sort of supernatural monster or curse. And Solomon Kane works with him. Usually Solomon Kane is kind of like the one keeping those monsters at bay while Enlonga is chanting his things and summoning something to get rid of some particular evil. And Enlonga actually rewards Solomon Kane with a staff. You can see the staff right here. It actually has the Egyptian goddess Bastet on the tip of it, and it's supposed. Little does Solomon Kane know that that staff used to belong to Solomon, to King Solomon. So it's kind of like fated for Solomon Kane to have that staff of Solomon. And the staff is magical, and you kind of get the feeling that it has a lot of unknown powers that Solomon Kane doesn't really know how to use. But little by little, he starts to understand the properties of this powerful staff. And so Solomon Kane starts to understand that sorcery is more like a tool that he kind of like gets rid little by little, not exactly completely free of it, but he does go beyond a religion as he starts to look at religion from a different angle. Because in the world of Solomon Kane, magic is magic. It's kind of like fire or water or electricity. It's just an energy right there. You don't need to place like a stamp of a particular savior or prophet or whatever for it to work. It works on its own. And Solomon Kane starts to realize that and trusts Enlonga and uses magic as sort of like a very subtle part of his arsenal. Although at the heart of it, he's still a very physical fighter, using his hands or his rapier or his guns to smite his foes. Now let's talk about Conan the Barbarian. And what is Conan? That's really difficult to say because he is many things. Barbarian is just one of the things he is. He's a thief, he's mercenary captain, tribal chieftain, a thief. Eventually, he is a king. So Conan is everything. It's kind of like he's a really universal type of guy. And there's actually been a bit of a sort of like a difficulty when translating Conan to other media because of censorship and such. I have, according to what I've heard a long time ago, He-Man was actually going to be a show about Conan, but when they took a look at the source material, they thought, oh, like we can't be showing kids this stuff, let's think about something else. So He-Man was actually going to be Conan, and you can see how this censorship affected the depiction of Conan in movies, cartoons, etc. Because everything is somewhat mild. You won't see like the beheadings and the guttings and all the hacking and slashing that Conan does in the stories, in cartoons, and even the movies. The Arnold Schwarzenegger ones are actually pretty good, although I think they misrepresent the cultural aspect of Conan, because Conan is more on the Celtic side of things, and they portrayed him in the movie as Germanic, but they're actually different because the Vanir are more like on the Norse side of things. Conan is more on the Celtic side of things. You have here Conan fighting a couple of Vanir, and you can see the difference in size. Even though Conan is pretty tall, you can see these guys are giants. They're still humans, but they are quite big and bulky when compared to Conan. In fact, many times Conan has been described as sort of like a panther. So that's one thing that I think they didn't get right in the movies. And Conan actually teaches you a lot about being free and being an individual. Maybe that's another thing that didn't allow Conan to reach something beyond of a cult following. Even though he's quite popular, I still think he's sort of like not that known of when compared to other more popular characters, because Conan does a lot of things that they go against religion, and they go against different governments. So it would be quite difficult to portray this is Conan just as Robert E. Howard presented him, because it's about freedom and the individual. Let's talk about some things that I consider that Conan matured. That Conan represents a step in maturity, through which Robert E. Howard developed as a human being. Because, for example, in Solomon Kane, remember what I told you about, like, he gets tricked all the time into showing how strong he is? Conan is quite roguish, quite opportunistic in his way of methods of killing and fighting. Because, for example, there is one adventure where Conan goes up into a ship, and he doesn't like the way that captain of the ship is running things. So Conan, someone with, let's say, more foolish, would try to kill the captain of the ship with witnesses or whatever, and he would get captured and imprisoned or whatever. But Conan waits. He waits until the ship docks at a certain island. He waits for the captain to walk down the ship, and so the captain is alone. And Conan goes after the captain and strangles him. Just like that. And then everybody like, whoa, where's the captain? And nobody finds the captain, and Conan, okay, follow me. And you know, it kind of takes like the role of captain. So another, there are many details like that. There are many ways in which Conan like ambushes or surprises the enemy, and his killings are quite planned. He always gets away with it because he's very smart. So, for example, there is another tale in, I think it was the Tower of the Elephant, where there is this guy, he takes a look at Conan, and Conan is actually pretty young in that story, and he starts pushing Conan, like, oh, you're just some idiot that uneducated or that is not sophisticated in the ways of this city, and he kind of like starts mocking or making fun of Conan. And Conan kills that guy, but he also hits the lights in the tavern, so in the darkness, in the confusion of the darkness, it's quite impossible to capture Conan. So when everybody like gets their stuff together, Conan is already gone. So Conan, as I was telling you, he's a lot more strategic and tactical when compared to Solomon Kane. Conan, some people could think, oh, he's just a dumb barbarian, but he's really quite intelligent. He's always planning all of those things, and most of the time he never gets caught when he does that. And he's also many times it is obvious that Conan fights through instinct. But because he has been in many different armies, usually in a position of leadership, it's obvious that he learned different disciplines and fighting methods and such. So he's actually also quite effective at killing. He's not going to be like attacking with just brute force. He's going to deliver one cut, one kill. He fights like that, and he's so strong and fast that when he wields that giant sword of his or axe or whatever he gets his hands on, he looks incredibly fast, considering the weight of what he is using. He also seems quite tireless. So he's like the ultimate fighting machine. And as I was telling you, well, it's quite impressive how Robert E. Howard describes battle, because he doesn't go too much into detail, but you can see all the guts and heads flying all over the place as Conan cuts down his enemies. Another very famous characteristic of Conan is that he distrusts anything sorcerous. There are only a few times where he actually uses some sort of magical aid, but usually in the form of of teaming up with a sorcerer. But for the most part, Conan considers all those things dangerous and troublesome. But it's also quite puzzling that he's somewhat knowledgeable in some of those things, because, for example, there is this time he's fighting this demon, And Conan remembers, I remember that demons are affected by fire, but I also remember that they are affected by silver. And using Conan logic, he carries a silver chest and throws it at the demon so that the demon is pushed into a fireplace so that it burns. So Conan intelligently uses two things to kill the. If silver doesn't kill the demon, surely fire will kill the demon. So that's the kind of Conan type of thinking. And so he's actually quite smarter than you would believe, and also a lot more, let's say, sophisticated or civilized than many other city dwellers. There are many times where those people that live in cities and such are quite ruthless, and Conan is a lot more, well, let's say, educated or polite. He's actually seems like a pretty cool guy to be around. Although you wouldn't want to get into the wrong side of, don't want to do anything to get him angry or whatever, because he will probably kill you without a second thought. Conan has no respect for many things. He has he has a very specific code, but Conan doesn't feel remorse. So for example, let's say he kills a bad guy, let's say a sorcerer, and he has sex on the altar with some maiden that he rescued, with the priest over there just lying corpse-like. So Conan doesn't care about those things, because Conan has that sort of like an attitude of that if it's a god, beast, devil, or man, or whatever, if he messes with me, I'm going to destroy that thing. So another thing that represents Robert E. Howard's maturity in that is when comparing Solomon Kane to Conan, it's, for example, the betrayal thing that I mentioned, that Solomon Kane kind of like took it really bad when someone betrayed him. There is one, although you could say this time Conan did the betraying. There is one time where Conan ended up as chief of this tribe. I don't remember which tribe it was, and he's kind of like at the table with all those guys eating, and there's this guy that is war chief of this other tribe, and they're laughing and eating, like good one, as so he like takes a break and goes to a side room, and he finds a woman there chained, and she's like, oh, help me, these guys, they caught me and they're probably going to rape me or whatever. And Conan is like, okay. And so he sits down at the table, he's again talking, having a good time, and then he takes this bone of the animal they are eating, and he bashes the skull of the guy next to him, the guy with he was laughing just a few minutes ago, and he does it like that. He feels no remorse, and like, okay. And so again, Conan's code of honor working in very unusual ways. But you can see the difference. Conan is not going to be, but I thought the chieftain was my friend. No, so you're going to do that? Oh, well, you want to play hardball? That's the type of attitude that Conan has. Something that I also like of Conan is that he has this nemesis, this arch nemesis, in fact, Thoth Amon, a powerful priest, a Stygian priest. And he, even though they never come to face each other in the original stories, Thoth Amon is always doing things in the background, and Conan is usually doing other things, and both of their actions, in some ways, sometimes directly or indirectly, they neutralize each other. They're kind of getting in their own way. For example, Thoth Amon releases some sort of beast to cause trouble to a particular city, and Conan then kills that monster. Some other times they actually help each other in a way, but again, without knowing. They're kind of like acting behind the curtain, and they don't really know exactly about the other's existence. So that's quite interesting to see it as a sort of like a very subtle, indirect rivalry of sorts. Even though in comic books and in the cartoon, Thoth Amon and Conan, they actually fight against each other physically, but it's a different way in the original stories. Conan is also, let's say, quite in control and moderate in his appetites. That is, he enjoys drink and food. He's going to get drunk, but what I mean is, for example, in his sexual appetites, you can see that Conan is getting, having sex everywhere, just getting laid all over the place. And But there is, for example, there is this instance when he has to rescue a very young girl, and she obviously becomes fascinated with Conan, and but he tells her, you're not fit to be a bride of the chieftain of the Bamulas, I think it was the tribe's name. So Conan doesn't think that that very young girl is mature enough to be with him. So you again, it's like a testament of Conan's intelligence, because he's looking for a woman that matches him on a mental level. He's not going to be sleeping around with a kid. That would be quite boring for Conan, because he thinks about so many things. He's somewhat of a philosopher at times, and they simply wouldn't understand him. Sure, he could have fun with them, but it's actually obviously Conan is looking for a more mature type of relationship. That is why he's always having sex with like for example the pirate queen Velit, or more like warrior type heroines. Although it is not exactly implied, Valeria probably had sex with Conan. The different princesses and queens and such. So that's also quite interesting, and many people actually ignore that. They think that Conan is just like sleeping around like some beast, and now he's quite sophisticated. Now, after seeing all of this, let's talk about Robert E. Howard himself, of what I think of him, because he teaches us a lot of things, even through his tragedies. First, I would like to explore a bit of his friendship with H.P. Lovecraft. A lot of people don't know it exactly, but they actually had a pretty strong bond, despite not seeing each other face to face through letters. Their friendship started with H.P. Lovecraft using a Celtic term in his, I think it was the stories about, and in the story about the rats in the walls or behind the walls, I forget the title, and he uses a Celtic term. And H.P. Lovecraft thinks that no one will be scholarly enough to detect this wrong use of the term, but Robert E. Howard notices, and he sends a letter trying to contact H.P. Lovecraft, telling him that he's quite puzzled by the way he uses that term. And H.P. Lovecraft, well, he admires that, because he notices this younger man, Robert E. Howard, as a sort of like a very intelligent man, with somewhat of a scholar like him. And that's difficult to find at times with very intelligent individuals. So it's only natural that H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard became friends, because their ideas matched, and even though they disagreed in many things, they had sort of like at the same level kind of understanding, because they debated about many things. They didn't agree, for example, when comparing civilization with savagery. Of course, Robert E. Howard was more on the savage side of things, and H.P. Lovecraft defended civilization, and they talked about the merits and the flaws, and talked about many things. So when Robert E. Howard commits suicide, you can really tell H.P. Lovecraft was quite devastated. You can see a very touching letter, In Memoriam, Robert Irving Howard by H.P. Lovecraft. In this edition of the book by Del Rey Books, actually this one has the letter that the In Memoriam document that H.P. Lovecraft wrote when Robert E. Howard died, and you can see it's one of the most emotional pieces of text that I've seen, well, at least concerning H.P. Lovecraft. I think that the only other time that I've seen Lovecraft get so emotional is when Lovecraft is writing about caves and dark places. So if you want to get H.P. Lovecraft emotional, you will have asked him to. You need to ask him to talk about dark places or friends. So it's quite touching, even so. And I actually wish that they gave more details on their friendship, because most of the things we know about Robert E. Howard's life is through different biographies that are somewhat incomplete, in my opinion, and the movie in a whole wide world by Nobel Prize, based on the book The Man Who Walked Alone, that is kind of like Nobel Prize's take on Robert E. Howard. Because for those that do not know, Nobel Prize was Robert E. Howard's girlfriend. That they were quite close, and because of different tragical elements, let's say, they didn't end up together. But I also wonder how biased, if there's some sort of like a bias or predisposition of Nobel Prize of portraying Robert E. Howard as something that he was not. There are certainly some clues that she was relatively right about many things, because, for example, in the end, Robert E. Howard did end up committing suicide, which makes a lot of sense with what Nobel Prize shares with us. But I still, at times, I kind of like take things with a grain of salt. I don't know if many of the things, because if you watch the movie, you kind of get the feeling like Robert E. Howard was the cause of many bad things in the relationship. But what if it's kind of like the case of, for example, in Saturday Night Live, there is this sketch. I don't remember what the name of the title. It was something like Rob Schneider's girlfriend, and he was basically Rob Schneider bashing his girlfriend. Like, in this episode, Rob Schneider's girlfriend was being mean to him for no reason at all. So I don't know if Nobel Prize had that attitude at times that, oh, it was all Robert's fault. But for the most part, if we were to analyze Robert E. Howard's life as presented in those biographies and presented in the experience Nobel Prize had with him, well, it's we can tell that Robert E. Howard was someone who had a bit of a tragic childhood, where his father was constantly moving around. He had to live at different places, and he developed a sort of like a sick obsession with his sick mother. He simply could not release himself from her bondage, so to speak. He was completely bonded to his mother, and he kind of like obeyed her at everything. That's was probably a huge obstacle in the relationship between Robert E. Howard and Nobel Prize. He didn't give Nobel Prize priority over his mother, and ruining his social life like that as well. So you can also see that Robert E. Howard treasured loyalty quite a bit, because it's obvious that he had some sort of bullying when he was little, because he once told his father, "I'm going to build my body so that I can break a man with my bare hands." So that kind of sounds like a lot of resentment. Maybe he had a lot of trouble with the kids. Maybe because he was really smart. I've met people like that, and I actually taught martial arts to some kids myself that they were kind of like nerds in very violent schools. So I understand that completely. And but I also have to wonder if Robert E. Howard was also had that level of commitment towards others, because and again, according to Nobel Prize, there were many times where she was kind of like ready to get married or want to take things further, and he's kind of like withdrew away from her. He was like, "Oh, my path, I walk alone," and getting sort of like that loner attitude of "I am Lobo and I need no one, I walk alone." So I think that sort of like a fatal obstacle between their relationship. And I also like it that Robert E. Howard, even though he was really smart, he also explored the physical dimension of things. He worked out quite a bit. He took some pretty massive proportions. There's this photo where he looked like all really buff. But I wonder if he worked in his cardio as well, because he also passed out from the heat at one time, and I know it's not easy for a white man to be under the scorching sun. I'm pretty white and I live in Mexico, so but by doing cardio, I actually improved tremendously. When I was little, I was under the sun, and all of the those kids that had darker colored skin, they were like, "Oh, you're such a wussy, you're having a bad time with the heat." And I was like, "Oh, this is hell." But later on, when I trained martial arts and I worked out, the sun gives me no trouble at all. I actually have to take like sun baths every now and then, because I love the sun. Standing just with my bare skin under the sunlight feels great. And so doing a good workout really does wonders. In fact, kids that are more like that were more adapted to the sunlight because of their skin, because they what would you say, they slacked off in their workout, and now they cannot go, they cannot walk 1 kilometer without almost suffering a heat stroke. So it was really important. I think that could have been something that I wonder if Robert E. Howard kept working out, kept doing exercise, because exercise also gives you quite a bit of a boost. That is in mood. It keeps you happy and optimistic. And during the later years of Robert E. Howard's time, he seemed like he fell into some sort of depression, and I'm almost certain that he stopped working out as much as he used to. I'm not sure, but I think that would have helped him quite a bit with his mood, because the entire suicide thing was quite tragic, and it also showed his attachment, his sickening attachment to his mother. So that's an important lesson to learn from Robert E. Howard, and never let those what would you say, pessimistic, fatalistic thoughts take over you, because you will start getting depressed, and you could end up killing yourself like Robert E. Howard. So that's a lesson that even applies to these days. But even so, it's still quite impressive that even though he had to face off against all those issues, Robert E. Howard left us with so many amazing tales of fiction through Solomon Kane, Conan the Barbarian, Bran McMorn, Steve Costigan. So I still admire him quite a bit, because some foolish people think like, oh, Robert E. Howard, what a loser, he killed himself, his writing is worthless and like that. But well, for what it's worth, Robert E. Howard did an excellent job in inspiring us, in showing us many things about himself and about life. As I was telling you, Solomon Kane and Conan the Barbarian, they just taught me a lot of things. Because I grew in a very religious area. I was too merciful for my own good and too naive for my own good when I was younger. But as I got into Conan the Barbarian and Solomon Kane, I had to become more, well, it's the only way to put it. It's ruthless when you need to be ruthless, and always stay true to yourself. It's kind of like that song in Guilty Gear Xrd Big Blast Sonic. There is a part of the lyrics that it says, "No use in passion, not my own." So don't let others control you. Always follow your own passion. Don't let religion or the government control you. Always keep it up, be optimistic, fight until the very end. That's part of the lesson that Robert E. Howard gave us through his stories, and even through that horrible event of his suicide. He left something for us to live a happier life. Well, thanks for watching this video. It was quite difficult to do, because it's, well, what you would say, it's quite touching. Every time I talk about Robert E. Howard, I feel like he's sort of like a teacher, like a sensei, to put it in a way. And so thanks for hearing my thoughts on him, and if you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.